Hey, welcome everyone. This is Mind Your Own Business. My name is Pablo, and thanks for listening.
All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for another episode. I'm very excited about this one. I have Monica Stokke, Stoke,
Stokke.
sorry, Stokke. Sorry, here with us. She's been working for sales for a bunch of years now, consulting people. But as a way of introduction, Monica, yeah, tell us about you. Who do you help?
Hi, this is Monica Stokke, and yes, I've been in sales for most of my adult life, and now I mostly in technology sales, such as engineering software, and now I work with companies to help them with technology planning. So it's come full circle for me.
Right, that's great, and because I am in sales too, some people out there know maybe, yeah. And I want to ask about company culture, especially in software selling, within sales teams. They sometimes tend to be toxic, but I'm curious to know your thoughts. Like, what do you think are the biggest challenges teams face nowadays when it comes to culture?
I think part of what I realized as I did sales for many years was that the entire concept of how we do things in terms of how companies buy, how companies sell, is fundamentally flawed in many ways. And things get way too ad hoc, not very strategic. There's a lot of dysfunction on both sides. And so I really could see that on the sales side very much, but also on the customer side.
Okay.
And as a salesperson, of course, you weren't really able to change the fundamental system, but I could see that being part of it, it was kind of an insurmountable task to change the culture. And I had to just kind of find my way within it. And that was always a big challenge for me because always felt like I fell short of what the customer actually needed from me.
Okay.
And I could go in there and I would sell a point solution, no problem, but I would look at the organization and go, what they need is something much more comprehensive in terms of strategy. They are making decisions that are just little bits here and there, and they're missing the big picture. And it's also not connected to their organizational objectives and goals. So they're making decisions downstream instead of having a comprehensive strategy on how can we leverage technology, for example, to meet financial goals, operational goals, and have those two strategies hand in hand so that we really can all march forward in lockstep. And that is the best way for organizations to move forward. But it's just not set up for that. You have the executives at a company set the goals, set what we want to do, uh, what are the objectives, and then that doesn't get communicated down to how are we going to get there on a granular level. And then the company is not moving in the direction it wants, and it goes, well, I don't understand why. And then and only then will they go, well, maybe we need to change some things. Well, now you're reactive, you're not proactive. And now you're rushing, and you're much more likely to make mistakes. You're much more likely to try to get a quick fix instead of really thinking ahead and being really strategic with how you do things up front. And then what happens is you engage salespeople, the salespeople come in, everything's hunky dory, they have the perfect solution. Uh, but do you really know if you do? Or are you just talking to a really good salesperson? And so, do you have all the facts? How do you even know how to look? And do you have time? If you really want to do things right, it's incredibly time consuming. And companies are so busy on the day to day that they don't necessarily have time to go, oh, in order to accomplish these goals, here's how we should handle that. Here's how we should have internal structures, enablement, technologies. Those things are very time consuming, and unless it's kind of built into the organization, it's just not realistic to do it.
That's great because like we were talking off camera before this how someone actually in a startup they bought a $80,000 software, and that person was no longer with the company like a month later or 15 days later. It's an article you
Yes,
wrote, Monica,
yes.
actually, and so it happens because people are not aligned, not on the same page, it just being reactive, and then all of a sudden you have an $80,000 software sitting there doing absolutely nothing, not even onboarded, unpackaged, and then like then we talk about budgets and the market and even layoffs. But then if we were always like on the same page with that, that wouldn't happen to begin with.
Yes, and it's beyond that because um, not only are they overspending, but they're also not now flexible and nimble because they cannot move engineers from one project to another. They can't move people within the organization because everyone is uh, can only do their own software that they're used to. And now you have a lot of risk associated with an organization because you are not willing to make the difficult political, internal politics struggle to standardize. And as a result, you're spending too much money. You have lots of, um, it's superfluous technology, and you're not able to have, be able to move resources around internally. So actually a pretty serious problem, and it's a problem we see a lot. I've seen a lot in companies having superfluous technology, companies not leveraging the technology they already have. And a lot of that comes back to the original problem of we haven't decided how we're going to implement the organizational objectives and have everything aligned. Things need to be aligned. And if you don't do that, if you don't have those hard conversations, everything just kind of goes in every single direction.
Yeah.
And you end up in what I call a hot mess, which is my favorite way to describe, the majority of companies are a hot mess. And I love hot messes because I love to fix things and get things back in order. So that's kind of the challenge on the buying side. And then on the selling side, there are a ton of problems, right? Because the salesperson has, either one product or a suite of products, and if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And they will push whatever they have, and that's their job, right? And so their job, could be to look at how that fits in with organizational objectives, but that might not be what even the people you're talking to even are understanding, right?
Yep.
So generally, a salesperson doesn't have access to the top level people, and so it just kind of reinforces the dysfunction then. And then you also have to remember that the salesperson isn't working for your company, they're working for their bosses. And ultimately, they're the ones who sign the paychecks.
Mm.
And you can't have two masters, right? You have one master. And so, as wonderful as the salesperson could be and as altruistic and they get it and whatever, ultimately, they are beholden to their organization. And their organization in sales, you have all kinds of metrics, sales metrics, how many calls you make, how many emails you send, how many meetings you set up, all these different metrics. Um, and unless you meet those metrics, it doesn't really matter. So you have a very dysfunctional kind of system set up. And one of the things that you kind of see why it's dysfunctional is you look at the language. If you one of the things if you're interested in buying something, one of the things you should look at is the want ads for a salesperson at the company you're interacting with. Because almost all of them have language like looking for an aggressive hunter to find new opportunities or new logos, is what they call it often. And guess what? That's who they're hiring, and that's what they expect. And so if they're looking for an aggressive hunter, guess what you're going to be? You're going to be aggressively hunted.
Mm, okay.
And how does that feel? Who wants to be that guy? Who wants to be aggressively hunted? So that's why you're getting bombarded by sales in terms of phone calls, because the way companies measure if you are indeed an aggressive hunter is that they have all kinds of key performance indicators to measure what you're doing. So they'll measure how many calls you make. They may even monitor your phone. Everything's digital now to see how many dials you make, how long you talk to each person, how many meetings you have, how many proposals you make, how many times you create a opportunity in the system. And so these KPIs then change behavior and sometimes unwanted behavior. So one of the companies I worked for one time, the VP um, was talking to the whole group, and he talked about a phone call he got, angry phone call he got from a customer.
Okay.
And the customer said he wanted to complain because he was getting bombarded by phone calls from salespeople all the time, and it was intrusive and annoying, and he wanted it to stop. Very serious phone call. That's not a good, you would think that's not a good thing.
Yep.
He said that was the best phone call he ever had because it proved to him that his salespeople were doing their jobs.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So so this is what happens, right? If you have metrics around, if you're measured on these activities, guess what? You're going to do those activities.
Mm.
Even if those are not the activities that create the best results. Because most companies don't even know really what works. They say they do. They have a lot of correlation. Correlation and causation, as you know, is not the same. What you have to do to know what kind of interactions with customers work is do go backwards. So whenever you have a sale, especially a sizable sale, you do a forensic analysis essentially of that engagement. Who did you talk to? How did this come about? And you follow the thread backwards. A lot of companies follow the thread forward. Things get tagged. They try to track things forward. But that's nice, but it's rarely accurate because you're relying on people entering entering valid data, and that's iffy. The best way to do it is to just go backwards and go, how did this all come about? And what you find when you go backwards is it is much more complex. That the sales isn't like this, a solid thread. It's more like meandering. Um, and that's okay. But until you know that, like I remember having a deal, and I got so much, oh, great job, Monica, and it closed in just a month and a half, and high budget. And I'm like, yeah, thanks, but like I went backwards, and I don't really I shouldn't get all the credit because the deal actually started 3 years earlier
Yep.
with somebody else. Went cold. It was marked as closed lost in the system. And all I did was send a little email and go, "Hey, you used to talk to this guy. I'm a newbie. You want to talk to me? See if, you know." And a month and a half we had a deal. And so sh- I shouldn't get all the credit because this was done a long time ago. But the inverse has been true, which is I have worked really hard on a deal, and it just, for whatever reason, wasn't the right time, wasn't, it just went cold. And a year later, somebody else came in and just closed the whole thing and got all the glory, right? And that's just how it works. But until we acknowledge that's how it works, it doesn't,
Yep.
um, then they can't change. So going backwards is very, very important.
And not only so, going back full circle, you said like it's flawed fundamentally, right? And that's how like the wording you use, the KPIs you use, the success metrics, and however you measure that. If you frame it that way, then yeah, it's flawed, like you said. Instead of going back, and then because sometimes sales people take all the credit. I am guilty of this sometimes.
Yeah.
But then it's not just one. You also need a product to back you up. You also need a marketing. You also need a customer person. You need to have like a branding. You need to have so many things. It's not like by myself. It's impossible to make that possible. And so, but I want to ask you maybe about like what question. Oh, sorry. You were
No,
going to
I
say.
agree with you. No, I
Okay.
agree with you. And I remember I had a sales manager
Mhm.
early in my career who said something really clever. And in business, they always use sports analogies, which makes sense because it's such a male field. But I don't, I use them too, even though I don't watch sports. And he said, Monica, remember that you're the quarterback. If you win, you get all the glory. And if you lose, you get all the blame. And it doesn't really matter what the rest of the team did because you're it. You're the one that gets measured. Nobody else really gets measured on this, only you. So you get all the glory, you got all the blame. Both sides of the coin.
Wow.
And so it was a really good lesson for me too um to own that, right? To own the failures of saying, yeah, it doesn't matter if somebody else mucked up over here. Ultimately, the buck stops here, right? That's the old saying. Um, but so that's a really important thing. One of the things that I find also, especially within technology, and um, a lot of the KPIs, a lot of the culture, it's almost a Neanderthal mentality, for lack of a better word, um, where we talk about hunting and let's kill it, and um, the things that are valued are things that are very aggressive, right? And one of the things you might want to ask someone in sales is if they watch one of those wildlife videos of a lion and an antelope. The lion is chasing, the antelope is running for its life. Who do you root for? Who do you
The
want to
antelope.
win?
Yeah.
You want the antelope to win. Okay.
Yep.
I think it's really interesting to see how people answer that question because a huge amount of people, especially in sales, especially in business and finance and whatever, they're rooting for the lion.
Yep.
They identify with the lion.
Yep.
Who does the customer identify with? Who wants to be the antelope in this scenario? Right? So so
Yeah.
that is part of why this is a flawed system because if we view this as hunting antelopes or hunting elephants, whatever else we're hunting, somebody's the hunted. And if we're hunting something, can we fundamentally have their best interest in at heart?
Mm.
How is that possible?
Yeah. No. I don't know how. It's. I don't see. I don't see how.
No, because your objective is to kill it.
Yep.
And and that's why I think, if you're looking at a vendor and they have that in their job ad, we are looking for an aggressive hunter. You can know, yeah, that's their objective. And if that's their objective, can they really have our interest at heart? And I think you know the answer to that. And so what's really interesting about that is when they've done studies for companies to ask, how do you want to engage with organizations, with sales organizations? What they overwhelmingly say is, we want a holistic consultative approach,
Yep.
which is great. But how can that even possibly happen if it's just not set up for that, right? So if you have a monthly target that you have to meet, right? These, looking out for the customer's best interest, these things take a long time. They take a lot of analysis. They take a lot of thinking, talking. That doesn't really work when you have monthly, quarterly, yearly goals. And if you don't meet those goals, you're out. So that's why I think, these things are fundamentally flawed because what we need to do is be a fellow antelope, right?
I was about to ask, how would you address that? But I guess that's
Yeah,
the
we
answer.
need to be a fellow antelope and work together on getting away from the lion. Let's get the lion out of here. And and let's walk together to find some fresh water and some fresh grass, right? And that is the ideal scenario, is to have a much more collaborative approach. And the current system just isn't set up for that. Um, and I think, if you look at also that language that you see that's also a very male language
Yep.
of, men go out and they hunt and they go to war and the women are home taking care of things. And so it's if you take that a little bit further, you go, okay, so they're really rewarding kind of a very aggressive behavior that's tied to masculinity, assertiveness, aggressiveness, and things that are traits that are considered more feminine, which is taking care of things, making sure things are in order, structure, planning. Those are more feminine traits and devalued consistently throughout society. And so you see all of these things kind of happening all at once. And that's also why you find so much misogyny within sales culture, because it's built in, it's structured that way. And so most women I know really have to be quite assertive internally to gain respect.
Yep.
We have to work very hard to gain respect, because it doesn't come naturally.
That's another, yeah. I mean, and culture and leadership, they like go through all these topics. So many things we can talk about. And I was meaning to ask, like, maybe like two final questions, if that's okay. One of them is like, if you were to start again, if you had 20 years old, what would you tell yourself? Like, going back to those, that community out there, or person that's looking for your advice on how to fix these things, how to be that antelope, friendly antelope,
Yes,
not the
yes.
lion chasing, but chasing, yeah, the antelope. Yeah. So what do you say to your 20-year-old self?
I think one of the things that would be important for me to know 20 years ago, 30 years ago, is to just have a more clear-eyed understanding of how this all hangs together, of the structure of things, so that I could better kind of mitigate and find my place in it, and find a way that is not so where you're not always feeling like you're fighting the system, realizing that you really can't fight the system. The system is so much bigger than you, and just figure out how to live within it the best you can, how to have the one master who signs your paycheck, but also be the type of advisor that your customers really deserve. And that's difficult. But I found over time that I was able to do it. But had I had a better understanding early on, I think it would have made it a lot easier.
I think that's a perfect way to have the full circle of everything we talked about. And yeah, final question is, where can people find you if they want to reach out uh, and connect?
Yes, and so one of the things that I did from my experience was, can I find a better way as my own consulting firm?
Mm,
And so essentially, my consulting firm is being the fellow antelope.
mm,
So, what my consulting firm does is I am solution agnostic. I don't have any master other than probably my pets. Uh, and uh, and I can really speak to a company, what they're trying to accomplish, and then I can interface with the tech companies. I can bring them in. I can deal with the salespeople and mitigate that interaction and guide them through something that's much more strategic. And and that's really rewarding for me, because I can now address both sides of the coin, right? One is how to be much more strategic in how we align company objectives with technology to accomplish those goals. And the other is actually bringing in technology that's really, really valuable. One, leveraging the technology you already have to meet those objectives, and potentially bringing in additional capabilities so that they can meet those company objectives, but in a way that's consistent and strategic and methodical. And that to me has been really, really rewarding, because uh, and it helps the salespeople I'm dealing with too, because they basically get a freebie, because I do all the work, and they get to have a win without at really doing anything, which is awesome also. And so for me, this has been very exciting. I have a company LinkedIn page, and my company is called very original Stokke Technology Consulting. And I also have a website, which is stokketechconsult.com. And yeah, I'm available for engagements, and it's very exciting. I work with a lot of different tech companies, a lot of different consultants, technical consultants who are engineers, and it's a much better way to do things. And I'm it's a really rewarding thing for me. I so appreciate you bringing me on. It's been very exciting.
No, thank you so much for being here, Monica, and it's been great. I think you pinpoint many of the issues today that no one's, well, I don't hear many people talking about. Just the way it's built up needs to be at least talked about and discussed, and then we can, work with leaders such as you to find a solution to these things, and we eventually will have a like that irresistible workplace or that amazing place to work and people to work with. So I appreciate you for being
Thank
here
you.
and for sharing all this knowledge with everyone.
Thank you
Everyone.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Bye bye.